Good afternoon and welcome to the United Jewish Federation of Tidewater and the Simon Family JCC's Lee and Bernard Jaffe Family Jewish Book Festival. My name is Wendy Duran Auerbach and I'm wearing two hats today, one as the co-chair of the book festival and the other as a member of the Holocaust Commission. So I'm doubly delighted to be moderating today's Simon Family JCC Book Club series. Today we'll be chatting virtually with Leslie Barry, the author of Newark Minutemen, which is based on the true story of a militia of Jewish boxers fighting against the rise of an American Führer and the thousands of Americans under his spell. Before we meet Leslie, I have a few housekeeping items. This event is meeting format, which means that you can see all of your friends, but you will want to view this event in speaker view. If you're on a PC or Mac, go up to the top right-hand corner and click on speaker view. You've been muted and will continue to be so throughout the program so that the audio for our guest will be as clear as possible. If you have a question for the author, please type it in the chat box at the bottom of your screen and we will try and get to as many questions as possible. A link to purchase the book will be posted in the chat box. And please let us know if you've already purchased a book or plan to, and we will send you a book plate signed by Leslie. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Leslie Barry, who before she was a screenwriter, author, and executive producer, also served as an executive with major corporations such as Turner Broadcasting, Hasbro Parker Brothers, Mattel, and Mindscape Video Games. No stranger to Virginia, Leslie is a graduate of James Madison University and attended a graduate program at Harvard. She and her husband Doug and their 4 kids live in, and I think I'm going to mess this up, Tiburon, California. But I just want to welcome Leslie. We are so excited you're here today, and we cannot wait to hear about the book.
Thank you very much, Wendy. I'm so honored to be here, but extra excited because, as you said, I have some really strong ties to Virginia. I actually grew up in Maryland, but yeah, I did go to school in Virginia, and also all my summers spent in Reedville, Virginia. We have a farm there, which we've had for hundreds of years. So love being a part of sharing this story in Virginia. So as you said, I have recently released a book called Newark Minutemen, and Newark Minutemen is, I call it sort of historical romance versus or meets crime thriller. And it's based on my own family true story that my mom helped me research in depth for about 2 years. And Newark Minutemen is a mix of action it's set over this true historical setting, which was a very violent period, but it also mixes with, I didn't want to sort of it to just be an empty nonfiction book. I wanted it to be something that people really embraced. And so it's mixed with drama, which is a romance that I've layered over this historical period, and throughout it try to keep you on edge. So I'm going to ask Jake, just so you can have a visual of the story before we jump into it, because there is some live footage here, and then you can see sort of the plot. I'm going to ask Jake to just run a quick 2-minute trailer so that we can have a reference to talk to.
Let us sing in tonight. But a flag was still there, putting out a light, burning in their eyes, taking all its breath until there's nothing left inside. Spiders marching through, I hear they're coming soon, but I never have to fear, night. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives. Just free your mind. At the end, we'll see the light. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives. With fire in our hearts, we bid farewell to once. But we are who we are. It's not written in the stars. Just don't close your eyes to the black and blue tonight. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives. Just free your mind. At the end, we'll see the light. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives. 37, are we ever coming home? Straight from heaven, I will never let you go. 37, are we ever coming home? Straight from heaven, I will never let you go. Just don't close your eyes to the black and blue tonight. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives. Just free your mind. At the end, we'll see the light. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives.
Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little summary of the story. So now I'll dive in a little bit more. So Newark Minutemen is a love story, but it's a star-crossed love story, kind of like Jack and Rose from the Titanic or Romeo and Juliet. And it's set in New Jersey in the 1930s during the Great Depression. And it's set across this little known historical backdrop to us of what was the America's rising German American Nazi Party in America during the Great Depression. And this story, what I've tried to do and what it came out to be was a dramatic perspective of one of the biggest untold stories leading up to World War II. And when I was writing the story, I discovered to myself a portrait of America 1930s that revealed America's response to fascism. So the setting, let me talk a little bit about that. As I said, it was the Great Depression, 1930s, and it was a very fertile ground for alternatives to democracy. So what you had going on was sort of this triple threat. So you have especially 1933 hits, 1933 on, but 1933 you have this whole leadership over in Germany, of course, that happens where Hitler gets in power. We've got these aggressive dictators. We have our own economic crisis that lasted longer than anybody expected. And we have this incredibly divided America. So we had this hopelessness, and we were looking for alternatives to our hopelessness, and we were looking left and right. And to the left, some people looked to communism and what was happening over in Russia, and they said, hey, maybe that is a solution. We had our own middle, which was really socialism, with a lot of the policies and plans that FDR put in place, where our country was subsidizing. And then, of course, we had the right, which was this fascism that we didn't quite understand what that meant. Remember, this was way before the war, or the decade before the war. And in that part of the divide, a shadow party filled it. And what it was a Hitler satellite, and it was called the German American Bund. And this is the story about the forgotten resistance fighters that were organized by the Jewish mob and our government to defend our country from this threat. So the story itself follows a Jewish boxer. His name is Yale, and he's part of this group of resistance. He's part of this group of boxers. They're called the Newark Minutemen. And they were actually organized by our Jewish mafia and our government to go up against the Bund. And what happens in the story is Yale goes undercover for this resistance in New Jersey. And along the way, he falls in love with the daughter of the enemy, the daughter of the head of the German American Bund. So as you can imagine, this relationship has all this conflict layered over this world of conflict. And my approach, because I really wanted the reader to understand all sides of what was going on, I wrote it in four narrators. So I wrote it so that the reader would have empathy for the bad side and the good side. Well, and in fact, so the four narrators are Yale, who's our hero boxer, Krista, who's the woman he falls in love with, the Fuhrer of the American Party, his name is Fritz Kuhn, and then the fourth is the mob king. His name is Longies Willman. So, so you've got, you've got good sides and bad sides, but really we've got multiple bad sides going on here. And so I wanted the reader to be able to connect with the good side and the bad side. And I wanted to share both the fears on both sides and the wickedness on both sides and the kindness on both sides. And I wanted, through these four eyes, that the reader could then examine why America closed our eyes to this satellite that Hitler was building in America for his Nazi empire. And in fact, the story's been buried away for reasons we can talk about later, theories. And if it had come true, we'd be living a quite a different history now. So, so where did this story come from? Well, my mom, who is 95 now, she lives in Maryland. On her 90th birthday, so 5 years ago, my sisters and I decided to have a 90th birthday where our goal was to invite 90 people there. And so we went on Ancestry and made all kinds of calls and got all the old cousins and friends and everybody to come. So my mom grew up in Newark, New Jersey, and she was, the daughter of immigrants, four older brothers, cousins lived down the street. They all helped each other. They all helped each other come here to America. And so all our lives, we grew up with these stories with the family of, so remember, my mom was born in 1925. She lived through, we heard stories about the Great Crash in 29, the Great Depression, World War II. Her aunt was part of the undercover here in America. One of her cousins escaped from Auschwitz. So we heard all these stories growing up, and as kids, we probably didn't really pay attention, but we heard a couple of them. But one story was about our uncle, and which was her older brother, Uncle Harry. And Uncle Harry was a prize-fighting boxer, and we had always heard this stories, and we saw he had a golden glove, and there was a newspaper article about him. So we always heard the stories about Uncle Harry. But at this event, some of the cousins started talking about my Uncle Harry, and they said, Esther, remember when your Uncle Harry would come home like 3 o'clock in the morning and your mom would yell at him because he was all beat up, and she said, I don't want you out there beating up the Nazis. And I like did a double take. I'm like, what do you mean the Nazis? I said, you mean when he was in fighting in the war, and they were like, no, no, there were Nazis right here in New Jersey, and your Uncle Harry was part of a group of boxers that would go out and do several things, but fight against them. And so I became I became fascinated with understanding the story. I'd never heard about that Nazis were in America at the time, and that my Uncle Harry was fighting them, and he was part of a group. And I became possessed with this story with actually one of my other cousins and I. And we started researching it, and I started discovering all of these. I discovered it was like thousands of pages of FBI documents that were only recently, fairly recently, like 10 years ago, unsealed. I found all these archives. I found some incredible diaries. I found 12 boxes of diaries from some of the other undercover people. And I started learning about this German-American Bund that at the time were holding public rallies. They were parading through our streets in every town across America with smuggled in uniforms, their arms in the air. They published magazines, and they were flaunting lots of hatred that was mirroring what was going on in Germany. So now I'm going to play you another clip, which is will really truly give you a sense of who this group was. This is a clip this is real life footage. And if you go on the internet, you can find, this is just a little clip, but you can find tons of footage. And what this clip is on Washington's birthday in 1939, in Madison Square Garden, the Fuhrer of this American party, Nazi party, held it was like a Nuremberg-like rally, and it was called Der Tag. And it was the day where they were going to officially start a Nazi party in America. They filled the garden with 25,000 people. There were 200,000 people rallying outside. But let me show you that. And when I saw this is when I was chilled. And Jake, you're going to run that, right? Great.
February 20th, 1939. Just months before Hitler invades Poland and ignites the deadliest war in history, thousands of Nazis gather for a rally at an indoor arena. But this isn't Nuremberg or Berlin. This is Madison Square Garden in New York City.
You all have heard of me through the Jewish-controlled press.
And the man speaking isn't a member of Adolf Hitler's inner circle. He's Fritz Julius Kuhn, a U.S. citizen and head of the German-American Bund, or association.
Kuhn wanted a rally to celebrate George Washington's birthday. The first American fascist is what they called him. They signed a contract with Madison Square Garden. Said, okay, we agree. No swastikas, no anti-Semitic signs, none of that stuff. Of course, once the contracts were signed, those agreements went out the window.
This program was produced for the German-American Bund rally.
We love him for the enemies he has made. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Fritz Kuhn.
Kuhn then went on to deliver a very, very predictable and very, very typical National Socialist stump speech about racism and the Jewish conspiracy and the communists and how everybody's an enemy and everybody has to be alike.
We, the German-American Bund, organized as American citizens with American ideals and determined to protect ourselves, our homes, our wives and children against the slimy conspirators and the parasite hand of Jewish communism in our schools, our universities, our very homes.
Then, an unemployed plumber tries to silence the American Fuhrer.
Isidor Greenbaum tried to rush the stage, but these guys beat him. It looked like an SS beating in the Berlin streets. His pants were ripped off. And the audience, of course, cheered at this. To see someone beaten up, had they known he was Jewish, they would have, probably even cheered louder.
Today, many Americans are aware of the presence of neo-Nazis.
Thanks. Thank you. I just wanted to give you a flavor of it. So this was a real event in 1939, 6 months, as they say, before Hitler actually attacked Europe. So what this group was is you had this American Führer, Fritz Kuhn, and he was at the top. And he divided our country just like the hierarchy that Germany had. He divided it into three, and in fact, Germany called our country the colony. Across our country, we had thousands of cells of, they recruited members, soldiers, trained them. They smuggled in Nazi uniforms. They actually got guns from our NRA, because at the time our NRA was giving out free guns, I guess. They trained under our National Guard. Again, our National Guard was training people. They trained even, it was an inner circle called, they were like the German SS, they were called the OD, and they were like the ones that protected the American Führer. And one thing Fritz Kuhn did very brilliant, he did two things actually very brilliantly. One was he wrapped the whole idea of Nazi idealism in Americanism. So he would say, we're going to get rid of all these people and make America great again, is actually a term he used. And the other brilliant thing he did was he took this group and he turned it into a corporation, and he divided it into 6 companies. And there was a newspaper, and there were these training centers and so forth. But there was also a real estate company. And what the real estate company did was, across our country, they bought 25 pieces of land and turned them into Hitler Youth summer camps. So Nazi youth summer camps. And children went to these camps. They could only speak German. They dressed in the uniforms. They learned Mein Kampf and all of the other publications, documentation of the time of the idealism of Nazism. Shockingly, the one thing that came out in the FBI hearings later, a little bit later on, was there was one in Long Island, New York, called Camp Siegfried, and they were actually raping the girls there with the goal of increasing the Aryan population. So the big question is, here, right in front of our nose, are quite a force. Even though they were a minority, they were led by a very charismatic person, quite a force, making a statement in our country. And why couldn't we stop? Why couldn't we stop it? Why couldn't we do anything? Why didn't we do anything? Well, there was 2 big reasons. One, at the time, as I mentioned before, we were a very divided country. And one of the reasons we were divided was not only economically, it was also that we had just finished another war. And the last thing anybody wanted was to rub people the wrong way from Europe and head into another war. Secondly, we had First Amendment rights, and this was very tricky. We couldn't do anything. And even though these guys are marching down our street, arms in the air, flouting hatred, we could not do anything. So what did we do? Well, our government at the time, so think back, again, remembering your history, in just a couple of years earlier, in 1929, we had a stock market crash. Everyone lost their money except who? The mafia, the Italian and Jewish mafia. Because of bootlegging, they still had the money. That meant they still had the power. Our government went to the Jewish mafia. They went to Meyer Lansky, who was head of the Jewish mob at the time, and they said, we need your help. There's a very bad thing happening here, and we've got to stop it, and we'll pay you. And Meyer Lansky said, no, you don't need to pay me. You just look the other way. We'll take care of it. Well, Meyer went to his buddy in Newark, New Jersey, Longy's woman, because Longy ran the boxers. Back then, the mafia ran all the sports betting. He ran the boxers. He had this group of boxers that it was an incredible network. And he decided to enlist one of his retired boxers, Nat Arno, to train these guys, both to be ready to go out and act as a resistance group, but also a network where on a minute's notice, they could call up 1 or 10 or 100 guys and go out to some of these public rallies or patrol the streets or stake out meetings or in fact go undercover. And so my Uncle Harry was one of them. And through my research and especially after I've met many other sons and daughters of Newark Minutemen, which has been incredible. So that's the story. And you have the story of there's revenge. I haven't talked about some of the beginning. I'm not going to give everything away, but Yale is driven by this revenge. You have this unholy alliance between our government and the mob. And of course, you have this forbidden love going on. So thank you for allowing me to share this story.
Wow. It is incredible. And I actually just found out on the chat that we actually have a son of a Minuteman here, and there are pictures of his dad in his boxing gear in our JCC. I've probably walked by it a million times and never knew. So we'll have to make that connection with you when this is done. I know you're still collecting Minuteman stories.
Yes, and in fact, I have a website and I have a whole gallery. So I would love to include that on my gallery.
So that is really exciting. I have a quick question. I mean, the other thing I think Kuhn did really beautifully was his use of media and radio, much like the Nazis did. And in your research, did he collaborate at all with Father Coughlin or any of those? You know, Coughlin was kind of like the Rush Limbaugh of his day. Did you find that he collaborated with him at all, or he was pretty much his own?
No, that is very insightful of you. And in fact, one thing that was very interesting was pieces of the Nazi Party actually started in the 1920s. There were groups, I should say, and when Hitler was first arrested in the early 20s, some of those groups came to America. So there were all these fragmented Nazi groups, both Italian and German, but so German, and they were all kind of acting on their own. And when Hitler got into power, remember that's 1933, when radio was just taking off. And just like the internet, what really propelled this group to power was that radio allowed them to communicate one message. And in fact, Coughlin there is a scene with him in my book where they're meeting around a table, but absolutely between them, I think Coughlin had millions of listeners and the Bund had millions of mailing lists, and they worked together to get the message out. So that's very insightful of you, Wendy. And that was certainly one of the, again, people say, well, this was a minority, why worry about it? But they had a voice. And that's one thing, we even see today, even though there are minorities of people, if they have a charismatic leader and a voice, they're a danger or a threat.
And and I know that there was a handful of congressmen also tied to some of these people. And I think at one time they were even using the franking privileges of the congressional franking privileges to send some of this propaganda out. I mean, that's how embedded they were.
Yes, yes, absolutely. There were, well, there were some actually congressional hearings that there was this one horrible riot, and the German American Bund started singing, "We want to see Jewish blood run through the streets." And so events like that and a couple others said, where there were some congressmen that stood up and said, this isn't right. I don't care about First Amendment rights. We need to find the line here. And there were some attempts with congressional hearings that eventually became the HUAC, HUAC, which was the, what does that stand for? It was the group that turned into when actually the communists were the party. It's
House Un-American
exactly.
Committee.
Yeah, exactly.
Which ironically became McCarthy's thing, but that's a whole nother story.
Exactly. But one thing that was actually interesting too was I mentioned one of the incredible pieces of research I found was I was on Ancestry, and so what, as a historical fiction writer, one of the ways I create my characters, because my goal here was for them to be as authentic as possible, I create their families on Ancestry. And so I was working on creating Yale, and there was a family there were the two brothers from Chicago. One was a newsman, one worked for the FBI, and they were asked by the Chicago Daily Times to go undercover for 6 months to the Bund, and then write. They ended up writing a 14-page series about their experience. Anyway, I went on and I created the family of these brothers, and in little mice type at the bottom, it was the son of one of them. He said, all of my father's diaries are in the Hoover Institute, which is right near me at Stanford. I was like, that's interesting. And so I became a member of the Hoover Institute, not knowing what that really meant. And I went over there, and I'd never been into an archive, and you go down underground and you're frisked. And I went into this place, and here are 12 boxes of John's notes that every little detail about his experience. And in fact, there are many scenes that I sort of take. There's an initiation scene where Yale goes undercover and becomes initiated into the secret inner circle of that protect Fritz Kuhn. And I actually mirror the actually initiation rites. And I ended up meeting John's son, talking to him, and he said, you use this material. I'm happy for you to use it. But the point that comes back to your story is John Metcalf actually went on to become one of the members of the committee. So he was very involved in that.
Not to kind of wanted to ask you how you chose what to make fictional and what to make more historical. I know you've talked a little bit already about how some of your characters were kind of, amalgamations of different people, but was it hard to kind of take your family story and integrate it into this once you got into all of this historical detail?
So I don't think we've talked about this, but the way I started the story was I actually first wrote the movie script, and I initially I sold the movie, and then I wrote the book. So I did it a little bit backwards, but in my writing of the movie, my goal at the time was to make this. I wanted to reach younger audiences. because I thought this was a great opportunity to, we have this challenge right now where all of our Holocaust people that were involved in the Holocaust are passing, and how do we hand that story down? And so I'm like, wow, this is a really interesting way to have an American story with younger people to help people understand what were the seeds of some of that was going on. And so in my idea of making a movie, I said, I'm going to make this an epic love story. To answer your question specifically, my whole goal was to make this as authentic as possible. And so all of my characters, such as Fritz Kuhn and all of his men, Longy's Willman, all of his men, all the boxers, my Uncle Harry, they're all true. I created Yale based on these two brothers, actually, because I wanted the flexibility to bring in some of these other things. And the girl, the girl he falls in love with, Krista, is actually based on the girl who was the one that was testified about being raped in the Nazi youth camp in Long Island. So their love affair is fictionalized. Each of my background characters, or the supporting characters, I should say, and are like I said, true. They're based on true characters. The part that's fictionalized is the love story.
Looked like from the trailer that the movie is pretty far along. I was thinking they hadn't been shooting. Were those clips from the movie?
Actually, that is part of, some of those scenes are part of what's called a sizzle reel. And the sizzle reel is to explain it to the directors and the actors. And that particular trailer we're going to use to promote the audio book. The movie itself, yes, unfortunately, we've had the breaks go on. We do have, there's actually a whole Variety is the trade magazine, if anybody wants the real details of where the movie is. So there is a story that explains where the movie is, but we've engaged the screenwriters. I have a producer. We've engaged the screenwriters, and we've been talking to a phenomenal director that his movie got pushed out a year. So if we stick with him, we'll be a year off too. So we're talking to some other people, but it's still moving along, and it's still very timely.
Oh, I think it'll be timely, unfortunately, for quite some time. Your timing with all of this is just it's phenomenal. So I think one piece of this that you kind of touched on, but I just love, is your mother's involvement with it, not only in telling you the story, but also, you talked to her a lot about the details, but she also was part of the process. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's funny. Literally for about 2 years, we talked every single day about this. And, we talked about the times, but we also talked about, I wanted to know the details of, like, what did you do during the day? And how did you take out the trash? And, um, you know, who were your neighbors? Where did you go? What did you eat? And so we talked about it for 2 years. We went on the road. We talked to her cousins, which was so great. When two of them are talking, all these old stories come out. And when I was basically said, okay, mom, and she read my drafts. I mean, it is really hard if you've ever written a book to get somebody to actually read your draft, because your first drafts are so horrible. But she read every single draft, and she was very honest with me. And I would ask questions for her, like, should I kill that guy? And she's like, absolutely. So she shocked me a couple times, but it was a different era. Um, but but after the 2 years of working, I said, okay, we're done. I'm gonna, I can sell the story, and we're gonna publish the book. She's like, does this mean we're not gonna talk anymore? And so it was an incredible experience. And I have to say, when the book came off the press, I sent her, she lives in Leisure World in Maryland, and I sent her a couple of cases of books. And I tried to call her and she didn't answer the phone. I'm like, what's happening? And finally she answered the phone and she's huffing and I'm like, are you okay? She goes, yeah, I was just out passing out all the books. So she's a celebrity at Leisure World and they wrote her up in the newspaper and everything. So um, yeah, so hopefully the movie will be out. As I said, she's 95, but she's coming out and visiting for my kid's graduation, so she's still going at it. So hopefully the movie will be out and she'll get to see it.
I hope so because when you start doing publicity for the movie, you need to bring she could probably be on the tour with you, so that would be great. Um, we're open for questions for anyone who would like to ask something. We have the last couple minutes of our time with Leslie. Otherwise, I can keep asking her questions if anyone has anything they'd like to ask her. Um, while we're waiting for some, I have a question about, and everyone, please put it in the chat. How have it's been out for what since December? Well, your ebook came out last spring. I read that they put it out quickly, which was great. So it got a little bit of an advance, and then the printed book was later in the year. What kind of response have you gotten, especially from younger people from the book?
Well, it's interesting because yes, my book wasn't supposed to actually be out until December 1st of 2020. And when the lockdown started everywhere, I think it was March that my publisher called and said, look, we are in a position to release your ebook if you'd like in about 3 weeks. And because, everybody's at home and people are starting to do that. And I'm like, well, sure, why not? Well, what I learned was, oh my gosh, 3 weeks to release a book when there's no bookstores open and nobody was really understood how to communicate. I'm like, what am I going to do? And so one of my daughters, she's in a Jewish sorority down at Northridge, Brittany. She said, how are you going to launch this? I said, I have no idea. She said, well, why don't we get my sorority and our Hillel to do a Zoom event? And I'm like, what's a Zoom event? I mean, this is March of last year. I had never heard of Zoom before. So it was these 20-year-olds that set me up. We had about 50 people. Um, I had no idea what I was doing in terms of technology wise. And I got the most brilliant answers or questions. It was an amazing experience. And all of a sudden, I understood what Zoom was. So I said, okay, I need to focus here. And my setting is Newark. And so I went to a couple places in the Newark area. I went to the Newark Library. I went to a couple JCCs. Um, I reached out to this rabbi, Jesse Olitsky, who was this, I didn't know who he was at the time, but he's sort of an influencer. He had a podcast. He just talked about Plot Against America. And I said, I have this story. I'd like to know if you'd be willing to do a Zoom event. And so, I don't know if I was the first author, but I was one of the first authors to understand that whole thing. And I had a focus and I had a group. And so I was able to initially get this great interest and exposure. And all of a sudden, I had all these Zoom events, and one sort of led to the other. And then I did the Jewish Book Council, and that set up more. And then one thing my publicist did that was really brilliant was so in addition to my ebook coming out early, my publisher also said, what do you think of your paperback coming out early? Because, the stores haven't been selling. They're doing because they've been closed, they're doing a whole different kind of thing. I said, sure. So then it's September, October. And my publicist said, well, have you announced the movie yet? And I said, no. And he said, okay, let's announce the movie couple weeks before the book, and and along with the book, so I was able to do that and get worldwide exposure. I got in Jerusalem Today. I got on Israeli news. So there are certain things in your life, I think, other than my kids and my husband, that it's just, these things are supposed to happen. And I think this was one of them. And it was just, you know, everybody embraced it, and I believed in it so much, and just one thing led to the other.
It was, well, as they say, it was Bashert. I mean, it really is amazing. And I love that you just jumped into it. And it was funny when I started reading the book, I thought I hadn't really read anything about it. I just read it cold, and I thought this seems like it could be a screenplay. And of course it had been. We have a couple more questions. One is have you seen any historical through line from the period that the movie is about through today? Like if there was any connection. I don't know how far you did your research, or when you were I'm sure you were watching what happened in January pretty closely, and there are obvious connections. Do you think some of the seeds that were left behind, I mean, I'm sure the movement kind of went dormant rather than disappeared. Do you think that they're, based on some of your research, and that what was happening in the 30s kind of just went underground a little bit and then has since kind of blossomed again? It's not that it had never ended.
Right. So I think so. Literally, what happened to the German American Bund was, from that clip that you saw, what kind of it backfired a little bit, because what it did was it raised this awareness of, my gosh, there's 25,000 people in the icon of America, Madison Square Garden, that look like what's going on across the ocean. And it woke up a lot of news and Americans and ethnic groups and America across the country. I mean, there were 200,000 people outside, uh, protesting what was going on inside. And also there was a movie that had just come out called Confessions of a Nazi Spy, that back then there were very few movies that also woke up. And what happened was Fritz Kuhn, about 6 months later, they never could stop him the direct way, but what they did was they got him on tax evasion and fraud, and he ended up going to jail. So between that and then the war coming, and Hitler actually taking action in Europe, the Bund, the Americans at least, said, whoa, this is not what we want. This is a threat. And so the Bund itself started crackling apart, especially because they lost their leadership. But to answer the bigger question, that was the seeds of Nazism in America. And while we certainly fought against it, Americans fought against it in the war, the idealism of it certainly is what seeds of what we see throughout until today. And I've thought a lot about this because I've gotten a lot of questions about it. And what I think is really the same as back then as today is the fear of the people that join this kind of thinking, whatever you want to call it, the far right or globally. I don't know if it's called the far right globally or not, but it's this idealism that goes on. And the fear, interestingly enough, is the fear of the white race becoming extinct. And that is a really hard fear to address, because you can't just say, oh, well, the immigrants are coming in, they're afraid of losing their jobs and all of that, and we'll just make more jobs. This is a much deeper fear. It's truly a fear of the white race going extinct. And we as Americans only look at it through American eyes, but if you look around the world, um, there's a worldwide movement of that fear with against different kinds of. Europe has a different issues of of that fear than we do, but I think the fear is the same, and I think that it's very easy to connect these days, just like radio was back then. And I think there's a true movement that we have to keep our eyes on and continue to educate not only our own country, but the world, because there are some places in the world still, India, Africa, they don't even know about the Holocaust. They don't know who Hitler is. They name their kids Hitler. They, it's it's a bigger issue than I think I don't know. Hopefully
No,
we're.
I agree. I completely agree. And I think your film is going to do an amazing job at helping get the word out, because it's the best way to engage people through drama and a little mix of history and drama. And I think the book as well. It's, not everybody's going to pick up a straight history book. And I'm all for getting the message to people in whatever way you can. And I think it's terrific that you've done this. We're running out of time. I don't think we have any time, but I have one last question. Can you, and this has to be short. Can you talk a little bit about your daughter composing the song for the film, and that's the music that we heard while we were waiting to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, this has become such an incredible multi-generational project. And one of the positives of the pandemic is that we've all been stuck together as a family. I have 4 kids, and my other daughter actually designed the cover, and we had it executed by a professional, but she actually designed the cover. It's the story of my mom. So many cousins and friend or cousins helped me promote this and get Jewish organizations to hear it. And then this is my 22-year-old daughter Shea. During the pandemic, she's very musical, and I said, we need to launch you. And as a musician, I said, what do you think about writing the theme song for the audiobook? And so she embraced the story and, talked to my mom about it and me about it, and wrote and produced this incredible song that is, yeah, we heard it, and then it's actually part of that trailer that I played. And it's I don't know, I'm the mom, but it touches me. It's riveting, and she embraced some of the there's some sort of some coded type messages in there, but I'm hoping that will be the beginning of her career too. And maybe we're going to try to sell it for the movie too. But
Oh, I
yeah,
hope it makes it in. I think it's great. I mean, it makes it, how you were saying how everything came together, and this was one of those things you just felt like it meant to happen. And I think the fact that your 95-year-old mother touched this, as well as your 22-year-old daughter and your other daughter, it makes it that more, it's just got so much more texture, and it makes it even a better, the story behind the story is so fantastic too.
yeah.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time. We could do another hour, Leslie. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you can come back. I'm sure you'll be doing other things and make it down, maybe come to Reedville and make it down. And I wish you a lot of luck in the future. We will be watching for the film, and I want to encourage everybody to get the book. It is great. It is a page turner, but it really does. Leslie did a fantastic job weaving in history. I've read other books about the movement that were straight history, and what you managed to get in there was amazing. But once you start it, you can't put it down.
Well,
So
thank you very much. And please, anybody on my website, NewarkMinutemen.com, there is a place to reach out to me. So please feel free to reach out with questions or pictures or whatever. As I said, I have a photo gallery of Newark Minutemen that I'd love to keep adding to.
Oh, wow. It is good. And yeah, check that out because that's also fantastic as well. Thank you for joining us. If you please check out jewishvirginia.org if you for upcoming events. We've got we've got even, we've had a lot of books and we have a few more left, as well as some events for the community. And I wish everybody a good afternoon and thank you again, Leslie.